So at this time, I invite our kids who are in the room, if you would like to go, not with me actually, hi Levi, with our adult leaders. The older kids have some time together and our younger kids will be together, and we have some fun things planned, so head on that way, and God bless you in your time together. Woohoo! Where's everybody going? So, my friends, wonder. When it comes to wonder, there's something wonderful that we experience in a good story. And whether that's fiction or nonfiction, which is why we started with that opening question, kind of thinking about the stories that we are into right now, the shows and books that we are into, and what it is that keeps us there. But I do wonder, when it comes to our Netflix queue or the books we're reading, the shows we're into, what makes a captivating story? Like, what is it that hooks us? What keeps us binge watching? What keeps us reading the novel like way past our bedtime? Like, what is it that gets us into the story? And I want to hear kind of your, like, what is it about a good story? Yeah. Ooh, a good cliffhanger. Like, what's going to happen? Yeah, totally. Great characters, for sure. What's that? Values. Right? Is that what you said? Yeah, absolutely. Plot twists. Yeah. Humor, for sure. And I was like, my life is serious enough. I need to, like, laugh. Like, I need a place where I can really laugh. Like, totally. Yeah, stories that, like, that I can identify with, that kind of pull me into, like, I like all the feels, like having things to cry about. Anyway, so like there are just things that really pull us into stories, and it's interesting to try to think about what it is. Like, why do we keep watching that show? But I know one of my favorite ways in which a story hooks me, just as Jesse said, it's like the plot twists are huge for me. I love that, whether that's in the middle of the story, whether it's at the end of the story. I've been thinking about some of those classic movies that we know. Can you think of some that have like the plot twist? Totally, that's one I thought of too. Usual Suspects, for sure. The Sixth Sense was one that I thought of, right? Gosh, what was the other one? Oh, Fight Club was another one, yeah. And I also thought of Frosty the Snowman, because surely there must have been some magic in that old silk hat they found, right? Yeah. Man, who saw that coming? But moments of surprise, plot twist, surprise ending, man, we eat that stuff up. Like, we love those moments. They work. They make the story work. They keep us hooked. And so one of the things that's happening in our text for today, the scripture passage that we're looking at, is a moment that captures a plot twist in the story of God. And it all centers around who people thought Jesus, as the Messiah, like what they thought he was going to be and what he should be doing. But there's this whole plot twist to that. So this passage, just to give us some context, it's kind of almost halfway through Matthew's gospel. So Matthew's one of the 4 biographies of Jesus. And so last week we were near the beginning of Matthew's gospel. The week before that we were near the end of Matthew's gospel. We're kind of in the middle now. And so we're in the middle, which means he's been born, like he's been baptized, he's given his best teaching ever, the Sermon on the Mount, which is that place where he says all kinds of good stuff, like the Beatitudes, the blesseds are, blesseds. It's the place where he says, you are the salt of the earth and the light of the world. We like that verse here at Salt House, right? Yeah. But he's also healed and cast out demons. He's called his disciples to follow him. He's reached out to widows and tax collectors and lepers and prostitutes, like all the people who are on the fringes, the outcasts of society. And finally, here in this passage now, John the Baptist, who is stuck in prison, he sends some of his friends to Jesus to put into words what many, many folks were wondering. So notice John's question that kicks off this passage. Notice how Jesus responds, and kind of wonder with me about how this connects to plot twists, okay? Right, Dave's going to come up and read this passage for us. This is Matthew 2, verses 2 through 11. That's not right. Matthew 12. 11.
Through 11.
Oh, gosh, typo. Okay, Matthew 11, 2 through 11.
John the Baptist, meanwhile, had been locked up in prison. When he got wind of what Jesus was doing, he sent his own disciples to ask, "Are you the one we've been expecting, or are we still waiting?" Jesus told them, "Go back and tell John what's going on. The blind see, the lame walk, lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, The dead are raised, the wretched of the earth learn that God is on their side. Is this what you were expecting? Then count yourselves most blessed. When John's disciples left to report, Jesus started talking to the crowd about John. What did you expect when you went out to see him in the wild? A weekend camper? Hardly. What then? A sheik in silk pajamas? Not in the wilderness, not by a long shot. What then? A prophet? That's right, a prophet. Probably the best prophet you'll ever hear. He is the prophet that Malachi announced when he wrote, I'm sending my prophet ahead of you to make the road smooth for you. Let me tell you what's going on here. No one in history surpasses John the Baptizer, but in the kingdom he prepared for you, the lowliest person is ahead of him. For a long time now, people have tried to force themselves into God's kingdom. But if you read the books of the prophets and God's law closely, you will see them culminate in John, teaming up with him in preparing the way for the Messiah of the kingdom. Looking at it in this way, John is the Elijah you've been expecting to arrive and introduce the Messiah.
Thank you, David. Did you make the shift when it wasn't on the screen? Sometimes you go, I can't what? Okay, I'm going to listen. Did you do all right? Were you able to listen? Cool. That's, man, so there was a lot there, but I want to dig into this text for us for a few minutes. So if you remember, if you listened, if you watched, if you were here last week, John the Baptist is the guy who we talked about last week. Before Jesus shows up on the scene, he's out in front of Jesus saying, get ready, the time has come and the Messiah is coming, get ready. Do you see then what's happening here? This is still John the Baptist. It's the same guy who is also Jesus' cousin. John the Baptist is now having doubts about whether Jesus actually is the Messiah, right? That's underneath his question. He's in prison, and so he sends his friends to ask Jesus, are you the one who is to come, or should we expect somebody else? Which is that's a pretty significant change, right? So what is going on? Why has John the Baptist had such a shift? What's going on here? So as we have talked about a lot at Salt House, whenever we read Scripture, we can just read it at face value, but we can also read it and say, we always know, as the beloved Transformers have taught us, there is more than meets the eye. So there's always more going on. So we're going to look at the more that's under there. So there was a script, a storyline that the Jewish people knew the Messiah would follow when the Messiah finally came. And Jesus is not saying the lines that they think he should be saying. And for John specifically, John the Baptist had his own particular expectations that Jesus should be another Elijah, another prophet, a man of fire who would sweep through Israel like Elijah did. Elijah swept through dealing with the pagan god that the Israelites were, that they would worship instead of Yahweh. And John was waiting for that kind of action, that kind of judgment, and also waited for this climactic moment, the moment when Jesus would confront King Herod, topple Herod from his throne, and become king in his place. And I imagine, as John is anticipating all this, he's waiting for Jesus, frankly, to do him a solid and to get him out of prison, right? Like, okay, Jesus, come through, get me out of here, and give him a position of power and honor and rule as Jesus becomes king. But it's clearly not going that way. So, of course, John, who is stuck in prison, going, what's going on? He would send his disciples to Jesus and ask, excuse me, what are you doing? What's going on here? And it's important to note that part of what's underneath this is that John is in prison essentially because he believes that Jesus is the Messiah, right? John put himself out there. He stood up against King Herod, announcing that God's kingdom and the true king are on their way. When someone says to the king, sorry, it ain't you, God's sending someone else, and people respond to that, they came to be baptized. They're responding to this message. They believe that it's true. We can understand why Herod locked John up, right? John's heard about what Jesus is doing, different than what he expected, going around befriending tax collectors and outcasts and the oppressed, healing people who are on the fringes of society. Jesus was gaining a great reputation, but not for what John wanted him to do. So John's wondering, what is going on? So what is happening here? How do we describe this moment in the story? It's pointing out what? A huge plot twist, right? This is a huge twist The Messiah is not a prophet like Elijah. The Messiah is not a soldier or a general who rallies troops to fight a war so that the Jewish people can be freed from Roman occupation and Herod's corrupt rule. That's what the Jewish people, they thought that was what would happen. But Jesus is changing that story. And here's the thing about a twist in the plot. In this story, but really in any story, when the story goes left and we thought it was going to go right, ultimately, what are we in that moment? We are, disoriented. Absolutely. Surprised. The word I'm going for is wrong. We are wrong, right? We are wrong. That's it. Ultimately, that's what's going on. John the Baptist, under that question that his friends ask Jesus, he's asking, Jesus, are we wrong? Are we wrong? And the answer is yes, John, you are wrong. In what you expected the Messiah to look like. You are absolutely right. This is the Messiah. But this Messiah has a very different agenda. This is a different story that the Messiah is creating. So hearing this, I kind of pulling back as we consider Scripture, I wonder if you've ever really considered for you, do you think that the Bible is a juicy, plot-twisting, didn't see that coming kind of story? Have you ever thought about the Bible in that way? I guess, is it something that would end up in your Netflix queue, right? Gotta watch that one. But, yeah?
Some of the things are unexpected, and it's very much, there are some very soapy parts with David and Bathsheba.
Totally, yeah. So, but have you thought about it that way? I mean, we can totally pull out those places, but have you thought, have you considered that? Being oh yeah, totally. That's it's very surprising the whole way through. I know, right? We don't be we're not wow, this is such a page turner. I can't, I just can't put this down for a lot of us. But that's what it is. At every turn, there are plot twists in the way that things should have gone. And yet many of us, we don't think of it that way. But yet there are so many moments that we could turn to that capture, as David's getting into, there's so many moments that are so surprising for us. And that is especially true in Jesus. Jesus is notorious for going off script, meaning that he doesn't do the prescribed, anticipated thing that is normative for his culture, nor for the Messiah, for the Son of God, what the Son of God should be doing. He doesn't do those things. He's this champion. He wins at plot twists. He just has got it. And today's text is just one of those places that kind of cues us into that. But I think we miss that is what happens in the story of God. We miss that for a couple different reasons. I think that we miss it because the Bible and the story of God has become so familiar to us, right? It's so normalized for us, maybe even domesticated is a word for it. We're just used to it. I mean, I think about how many times we've seen the cross-stitched picture of Noah's Ark, all the little animals together, and the kids' book with Jonah getting swallowed by a whale. I mean, okay, but all the ways in which Jesus, too, Jesus standing up against injustice and walking on water and feeding the hungry and walking out of an empty tomb. We forget how surprising the story of God really is. And this matters for us here today as people of Advent in this season of wonder, because the Christmas story, the birth of Jesus Christ, is the epitome of a plot twist. God came to earth as a human being. Didn't see that one coming, right? I mean, it's just I'm sorry, what? And, God came, and not as this adult with superhuman strength and power and rallied armies to defeat Herod, right? That's what a Messiah should do, right? Save everybody. But Jesus came as a baby in a manger, born to a teenage nobody. Was a one stoplight, one liquor store kind of town, right? Nobody comes from Nazareth. There's nothing there. But the Christmas story is one of the biggest plot twists of all time. And yet, it's just one little turn in this twisty story of God. And that story of God doesn't end when we close the final pages of Revelation. And it's not end scene. Okay, God's done. Okay, that was a great story. That's just over. Right? The story of God continues in our stories, in our world, in the continuing unfolding of time. And you know what? Is God done with the plot twists? No. Because our God is a God of surprises. Because Jesus shows us a way of going off script and not doing the prescribed, anticipated thing that is normative for our culture. We will keep finding ourselves in the plot twists, in places where our lives have gone in the opposite direction of what we thought, where the world feels backwards or upside down, which means we, again and again, my friends, we will find ourselves in the profound moments where we are wrong. And does anyone like being wrong? Anyone like that? Yeah. Ooh. My 6-year-old definitely doesn't like being wrong. But you know what? Here's the really crazy thing in all of this. It is so good for us to be wrong. It is good to be wrong. Kim sent me a TED Talk 2 weeks ago. Catherine Schultz spent 5 years researching being wrong. I know, right? Career that you missed, right? I wish I had thought research being wrong. That would be awesome. But we're going to hear just 2 minutes from her TED Talk. I recommend the whole thing. It's really excellent. But it's called On Being Wrong. And this clip, it's in the middle, so we don't have the full context, so we'll kind of enter midstream. But she's coming out of a place where she's talking about how we get stuck in thinking that we're right and how that's detrimental. So she's kind of unpack some of that stuff. But still we can kind of pick up on a bit of how good it is to be wrong.
So this is a catastrophe. This attachment to our own rightness keeps us from preventing mistakes when we absolutely need to, and causes us to treat each other terribly. But to me, what's most baffling and most tragic about this is that it misses the whole point of being human. It's like we want to imagine that our minds are just these perfectly translucent windows, and we just kind of gaze out of them and describe the world as it unfolds. And we want everybody else to gaze out of the same window and see the exact same thing. That is not true, and if it were, life would be incredibly boring. The miracle of your mind isn't that you can see the world as it is. It's that you can see the world as it isn't. We can remember the past, and we can think about the future, and we can imagine what it's like to be some other person in some other place. And we all do this a little differently, which is why we can all look up at the same night sky and see this, and also this, and also this. And it is also why we get things wrong. 1,200 years before Descartes said his famous thing about I think, therefore I am, this guy, St. Augustine, sat down and wrote, Fallor ergo sum. I err, therefore I am. Augustine understood that our capacity to screw up, it's not some kind of embarrassing defect in the human system, something we can eradicate or overcome. It's totally fundamental to who we are. Because unlike God, we don't really know what's going on out there. And unlike all of the other animals, we are obsessed with trying to figure it out.
What do you think? It is good for us to be wrong. I err, therefore I am. It's totally fundamental to who we are. My friends, I wonder, what are the plot twists that you're facing in this season of your life now? A recent one or something that's been playing out for a while? And I assume that there must be something. It could be a continuing twist in the continuing twist that we're all living through in our country's political climate. It could be the amazing, surprising twist that we as a new church have been asked to sell some of our land for a 24-hour shelter for families and for women experiencing homelessness. It could be a very personal twist in your job, in a relationship with your children, with struggling with something, depression, fertility, infertility, loneliness, a new love in your life. The God of Israel, the God of Jesus, we are living this story in this world with this particular God, and there's always going to be something if this is the God that we believe in. So what twists do you hold now? I was just one example from my own life from a few years back when I was in seminary. I had I had to spend a summer as a supervised chaplain in a hospital. It's a very intense program. It's part of our education. It's also a very fruitful time of formation in seminary. Jason and I were living in Berkeley, California, where my seminary was, and Jason was working at a church about 30 miles inland from there. So I was looking for a position so I could stay in the Bay Area and do that for the summer. And I had interviews at 2 hospitals. I was sure that I was going to get the first one, which was in Oakland at Alta Bates Hospital, which was pretty close to where we were living, and it just made sense. So yeah, that would be the one that I would go to. That'd be great. That'd be easy. But since I'm talking about plot twists, well, I got the phone call, and they let me know that I was not accepted into that program. And essentially the supervisor said, yeah, we don't think you'd be a good fit for the program. And all I could think was like, I'm sorry, why would I not be a good fit for your program when I live close by and I'm awesome? Like, I don't understand. How does this work? But I was wrong. I was wrong. But I thankfully did end up getting a position at the other hospital. This one, though, was in the city in San Francisco, so I had to take BART, then take a shuttle to, so I was taking public transportation to get there. It was a lot of traveling. I actually ended up switching and taking casual carpool, which is this thing where you wait in a line and cars pull up and you hop in, and you essentially you allow that driver to go over the Bay Bridge in the carpool lane. And you get a free ride. And so it's also totally scary. I mean, it's who are you gonna ride with? But it's been going for years and there's never been any crazy things that happen. There are all these rules, you don't speak unless spoken to, all this stuff. It's you just get in the car and you ride and then you get out. Anyway, it was awesome. So it meant that I was figuring out all this stuff, totally taking me outside of my comfort zone. It meant that the 24-hour shifts that I would do on call, I was too far away. I couldn't stay at home. I'd have to stay in a hotel close to the hospital as we did that. So total plot twist for me. So that summer totally it just stretched me out of what I would have chosen. Total comfort zone stuff. It's just not what I would have chosen. And in ways that now that I'm on the other side of it, I am so grateful to have had that experience. But if I had been right, I would have missed the entirety of what that summer had been. So I want you just to be aware of your own current twists, the ways in which you find yourself wrong. And as we take a moment, I want to look back at this text again just for 2 quick things that we see that speaks to us in our own plot twists and in ways that we may be dealing with being wrong. So first, as we consider this text, so we take great comfort in knowing that John the Baptist, Jesus' cousin, who was in prison because he thought the plot was going left when it went right, he does this too, right? John the Baptist is wrong. And I love that. And we find that really encouraging, right? I find that really encouraging. Anyone else? Yeah, you with me? Okay, cool. The Bible, again and again, what I love about the Bible is that it's not filled with people who show us perfection, how to be super spiritual or something. No, these are people who are messy and moody and problematic and imperfect and whiny and they get it wrong all the time. They demonstrate for us how living a life of faith is not a life where, we have it all figured out, where we have the answers. John the Baptist shows us that we will get it wrong. Fundamental to who we are, right? And in those times, not to pull away and hide, to be he's not just slump down in his cell and be man, I was so wrong. He sends friends. He's okay, what is going on here? And I love that too, to come out and be honest about the questions that brings up for us. So it's so good to ask questions, and I love that that's shown for us in this text. For us in our own twists, we consider, this is a question for us to hold, we just consider, what are the questions that we need to ask? What are the questions that we need to ask when we find ourselves wrong? How do we hold a posture of curiosity instead of shutting down in those times of being wrong? So second, just the other thing to pull from this, I love what Jesus' response is to this question. There's no eye roll, no are you kidding me? Do you not get it? There's no scolding that they're asking the question, right? But Jesus says, look around. What he actually, I want to read it to you. What he actually says is, go back and report to John what you hear and see. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, those who have leprosy are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the good news is proclaimed to the poor. He says, look around. Tell John what you see and hear. Yeah, it's not what you expected, but pay attention to what God is actually doing. Jesus says to John, and we hear it for us too, use this moment where you feel stopped in your tracks. Use it as opportunity. This is opportunity to see things with fresh eyes, with new perspective, with the humility of knowing that you are wrong and that's okay, and see what God is doing in this and around you. So for us, just a second question to hold as we consider our own twists is just, what do we see and hear? What is God up to in this? How do we look around and pay attention to what God is doing? And I always want to add the important footnote when we kind of talk in this direction, that not all plot twists in our life come from God. Let me say a little bit about that. So God does not give us cancer, because that would be a great twist for our life, right? God does not break up our marriage or cause the car accident, whatever, there are things that just happen. We live in a world of plot twists, and some of them are emerging out of the very real brokenness of our world. And that ain't God, right? We will also just be in those kinds of twists. But you can bet, even when we are in those kinds of times, that God will be in the mix of those times. So yes, we can still ask this question. We can stop and look around and ask, what is God up to in this? Even in living through those times that are not from God, because we believe that God is always up to something. So you know what I mean? I just always want to make that distinction. God really gave me this to no, God did not give that to you. So just to name that. So if you have been here for the last 2 weeks of Advent, then you know that our experience of wonder has been marked by this painting, right? So what should be happening right now if we're continuing our Advent journey? There should be painting happening, right? That's what we're doing. That has been our journey. It began as a blank canvas. If you haven't been here, Danny Dodge, our own Danny Dodge, she's been painting it live during the sermons, which has been awesome. The first week it went from it became bold colors and then covered in this darkness, this muted night sky. Then last week the earth and the first signs of stars began to emerge. And today, what do we notice? Plot twist, right? Surprise! So there's no Danny. She's actually on vacation in New York. But you didn't see that one coming unless you're friends with Danny. Linnea's I know Danny's not going to be here. She's in New York. But so we were wrong. It's not going the way that we thought it would. So will this painting be changed today? Oh, this painting will be changed today. The plot twist is that it will be changed by you. Dun, dun, dun. Because being wrong, being in the plot twist, as Catherine said, actually it cut off before the last sentence, which I loved, which I thought was going to be in that clip. But Catherine says, when we become obsessed with figuring it out, when we look beyond ourselves, when we become obsessed with figuring it out, that is the source and root of all our productivity and creativity. Good things happen when we're wrong. So she's saying that's this birthplace of productivity and creativity, when we're in that space of being wrong. So we're going to have a chance to come forward in a few minutes during communion, and we're going to dip a finger or a thumb into the white paint and dab our fingerprints on this canvas, adding stars, adding dots to this night sky. And as we do it, we embody the creativity that is birthed when the story changes. We embody how we believe that beautiful things can emerge from those times that can feel so shocking, even embarrassing. They can be hard times when we're wrong, when things don't go as we expected. When that happens, beautiful things can still emerge. We're going to embody that as followers of Jesus, we believe in a God who is full of surprises, including making us become painters, right? That we believe in this God who's full of surprises, and because of that, it is good for us to be wrong. So we're going to embody all of this in a few minutes as we do become painters together. And we also will come forward holding the tension of whatever current twists that we have in our lives, believing that God is up to something in those unexpected times. So the final thought that I just want to leave with us for today is to come back to how this connects to wonder. And to do that, I want to do it through a quote from Catherine Schultz's TED Talk. Near the end, she says this: if you really want to rediscover wonder, You need to step outside of that tiny, terrified space of rightness and look around at each other and look out at the vastness and complexity and mystery of the universe and be able to say, wow, I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. If you really want to rediscover wonder, to be able to say, maybe I'm wrong. Jesus' invitation to John and to us is to see and hear, to look around, and to see that the story of God unfolding in our world and in our lives now, it continues to surprise us. So the challenge I want to offer us today, an invitation, is to be people who step outside of the tiny, terrified space of rightness and look around at each other and look out at the vastness and complexity and mystery of the universe and be able to say, wow, I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Friends, can we be people who try to do that together? Can we do that? Can we be people who reclaim Augustine's line, I err, therefore I am? Man, even just like getting ready this morning, there are moments where I'm like, oh, like, you do something wrong or whatever. Like, could I in those moments be like, I err, therefore I am? What if could I teach that to my children, right? Whew, that's a lot coming from this perfectionist. But friends, can we be those people? I mean, this is something that needs to be on the Post-it notes on our computers. This needs to be the cross-stitched wall hanging for us. I err, therefore I am. That's hanging on the wall. Can we reclaim the practice of being wrong as central to who we are as God's people? Let's pray.